Bonsoir, Max.
Bonsoir, Paul.
So usually Max is in a different location than me, but this time Max and I are together because Max is doing a toxicological course with us it's a post-educational course in toxicology that's organized by, well, the higher society is the NVT, so the Dutch Toxicological Society. So it's nice to have Max here. We're busy.
Yeah,
I mean, we're giving a lot of lectures. And every Tuesday, almost without fail, I have a telephone conference, or sometimes actually physical, with Walter Pfaller. So Walter Pfaller was I guess my second mentor, but more my most influential mentor, because I kind of copied the stuff he did. And I eventually took over his lab. So me and Max are currently in Amsterdam in my bar and my recording studio, which, well, mostly a bar. And Walter Pfaller is in Innsbruck in a castle, Walter, right?
Yeah, I'm in Innsbruck in a castle which was built in the form it's open for visitors in the time between 1470 and 1510.
Right.
And it was in fact the hunting seat of Emperor Maximilian I, who married Mary of Burgundy, and by utilizing clever marriage policies, really was the founder of the later Habsburg Empire. It was together with the Spanish and the Austrian line were at this time still together, and the son of Maximilian split the lines then to the Spanish. And
is it that Maximilian's heart is in Innsbruck?
No, Maximilian's heart. Honestly, I do not know where Maximilian's heart is buried.
Wasn't there some suggestion it was in the Volkskirche, the Black Man's Church?
No. The Black Man, the Church of the Black Man, for which Innsbruck is famous for, that was designed as the burial stage for Maximilian I.
Right.
But he died before the sepulchre was finalized, and as far as I know, he died on the way to his seat in Lower Austria, in Wiener Neustadt. He died in an inn in the city of Wels, which is in Upper Austria, and he is buried under the stairs up to the fortress of Wiener Neustadt, and his heart was expected to be found in the sepulchre of the Black Man's Church, but unfortunately it was not the case. I think it's not known where the
well, in a way, my heart metaphorically is kind of in Innsbruck. I brought my brain to Amsterdam. So Walter, me and Walter met each other. I can't remember exactly, but it was at least 26 years ago in Dublin.
24 years, yeah.
Yeah, because I moved to Innsbruck just for a sabbatical, just for a few months in 1999. I finished my PhD in 2001, but while I was in Innsbruck, one of Walter's very important researchers got a job in America, which was very exciting for everybody, but it left a vacancy, and Walter asked me, could I fill the vacancy for a couple of years? And I fell in love with Innsbruck immediately, and I was so happy to take up that vacancy, and then I stayed. I was 18 years in Austria. So Walter made me love Innsbruck.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Walter, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So you became, well, you weren't initially famous for this, but you started doing cell culture pretty early in your career, and you were an early adopter of cell culture, let's say. Is that correct?
Yeah, in fact, I started my career, although I'm a physiologist by education and career track. I did not start my scientific career with a physiologic topic. No, I started it with a morphologic topic. So I always, I was always.
Morphologic, Walter.
Pardon me?
Yeah, explain morphology for the lay audience.
Okay. Morphology is a subject dealing with the appearance of living matter. Okay, so morphology, everything we know, either living or immaterial matters have a certain function or are built. Either the machine is built for a specific purpose, and it's the same with living matter. It has developed by some curious
evolutionary
processes we will talk about later.
It was evolutionary engineering in a way, and I mean Max was discussing in a previous podcast about Robert Hooke, and Robert Hooke was one of the first to look at dead and living matter underneath a microscopic magnification. So Max, that's morphology. When you look at things at maybe a higher magnification or a lower or closer to the function of those things. And Walter, I think one of your morphological adoptions was the electron microscope, which became famous around the time you were using it.
No, it was already famous. It became famous in the times between the big wars, between First and Second World War, and it was invented by a Siemens employee, a physicist, who was designing a oscilloscope which can work at higher tensions, at higher voltages. And what the outcome was the electron microscope.
Could you explain in kind of layman's term what the electron microscope does?
Yeah, electron microscope. I mean, it has something to do with microscopy in general, of course. The light microscope Paul Jennings was just talking about before, which was invented in the Netherlands, by the way, by Hans Janssen and Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. They really brought science to use by using little lenses, glass pieces, to observe enlarged living materials or dead materials. And the first application was described in a nice essay by what was the British philosopher Hooke.
Oh yeah.
Robert
Hooke. Yeah.
What was the first name of him?
Robert Hooke.
Robert.
Because he was the guy who coined the term, the name cell.
Yeah.
Because
he described it in the beginning as little boxes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And because science uses Latin as the major language to communicate, he gave them a Latin. He allocated the Latin term to these little boxes and came to cellular or cellulae.
Well, I believe it was little rooms, not boxes.
It's a little room.
Yeah.
Cell is a little room, little box. Yeah, it is a little box for monks.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. He made this analogy. He was looking at cork.
Yeah, cork. It was
cork slice, right?
a thin layer of cork, which you can cut from the bark with a sharp knife, and that was first of all a nice pattern which attracted him, and he saw that there is something in the cellulae, and Anthony van Leeuwenhoek started then to observe other things, water drops taken from various locations, and detecting and identifying various kinds of animals which were swimming around there. And so it was, in fact, studying of the function called life started with a technical instrument, the microscope.
So it was basically magnification of things you can't ordinarily see with your naked eye.
That's correct. Or you can, and all kinds of efforts have been invested in order to maximize or to enlarge the magnification every time a new instrument has been designed. So it ended with the electron microscope. That's still the end of the ladder nowadays, and the electron microscope uses, instead of light, it's difficult to explain. We have to make a little excursion into physics. Physicists found out over the years that light is not only a wave, an immaterial matter. It's also translocating particles, little particles, called the photons. And the chemists have found out, meanwhile, that all matter consists of chemical basic bricks, or how you call it, a Baustein.
Building blocks, Walter.
Building blocks, so-called atoms, and the atoms, there exist a number of different species of atoms, and these atoms give rise to what we identify then as various materials by having little particles circling around the heavy core of the atom. That's how the electrons. And the electrons that was found out by physicists, they behave similar like the photons making up the light beam. So light was behaving identical like electrons in an atom. And if you can release the electrons from their usual location by heating up the element or the atom around which the electrons circle, and they leave then the orbits of the atom, and since they have an electric charge, they can be manipulated by exposing them to various types of electric charges.
And then the real effect in the end was the magnification power was how much more increased?
Now, in the end, it turned out that the wavelength of the electrons is very, very short, as is the wavelength of, even shorter than the wavelength of light we still can experience. So, and the problem was how to get them in a orderly beam, to make up a beam, and that was done by the Siemens employee Ruska, who invented this instrument called electron microscope. So what he used a simple it's a simple setup. The source for electrons is a hairpin loop of tungsten, which can be put, where you can let electric current flow through. That mobilizes the atoms in the hairpin wire, and the energy which you put in by electric current is so strong that it can expel electrons from their orbits. And since they are negatively charged, you can put a positively charged instrument in opposition to the source of electrons, and then you get an electron beam. But the beam is not good enough to make anything with it. So you have to manipulate the beam to make it parallel rays of electrons, etc. Like in the physics lessons you make with mirrors and lamps and so on. So the electron beam is then created, it's bundled and made smaller and smaller by putting electromagnetic fields into the path of the electrons.
All right.
Electric fields in the form of a ring, like a lens, and you really change and manipulate the appearance of the electron beam. Now, the electron beam, or the equivalent of light particle, of photons, the electrons in the electron beam, that's a bit more tricky, because electron beams, the wave nature of the electron beam, of the electrons, depends on the speed with which the electrons go down the beam, or through the beam. So if the electrons go slowly through the beam, they won't come far, because they collide immediately with another electron and another atom, etc. So you can generate an electron beam only in vacuum. So where the electrons can let occur the maximum free path length they can achieve. So without collision to any other particle. So the speed of the electrons is produced by the potential difference between the hairpin loop, which is heated up to generate electrons, and to get the exit work done for the electrons, and an anode, which is positively charged. And this potential difference is usually around 100 kilovolt.
But I think we might be getting a little bit too technical, and it's fascinating. But the application then is that the resolution increases. So when you look at a specimen, the resolution is what order of magnitude higher than a light microscope?
It's around.
I teach that as well. You will correct me if I'm wrong, but I teach my students that microscopes are defined in quality by their resolution, which is the smallest distance that you can see which separate 2 points. And this resolution is
different with two.
Yeah, the smallest distance that enable you to distinguish 2 points. That's resolution. And
that's
for
right.
an optic microscope, then it means using a good one and using UV, which is less results.
In the range of 20
0.1 micron.
Micron.
Yeah.
1 micron and below, even below.
Yeah.
Nowadays, even it's below.
And the electron microscope?
The electron microscope resolves about 3 to 5 angstroms. Angstroms is 10 to the power of 10 to the power 10 or minus 10.
10 to the power minus 10.
Yeah.
And to illustrate that, if you compare it to virus, basically with an optic microscope, you would see virus as a point, whereas within electron microscopes, that's how we see all these pictures of virus.
You can, with the electron microscope, you can come in the range in the resolution, which gives you a tool to observe atoms, single atoms.
So just to the audience who are not in this field, if you look down on a light microscope, so this is what I do practically every day, and you can see cells, you can see that they're present, you can see their gross morphology, you can see they have a nucleus, and you can only see that they have other things in the nucleus. You can identify a few substructures in the cell. In the cell, which is surrounded by the cell membrane. Right, and if you stain these organelles, we're talking about like mitochondria or something, selectively, then you can see them with fluorescent microscopy. But fluorescent microscopy is relatively new. That's only about, I don't know, in the last 30, 40 years. But the electron microscope can see these things like inherently. So you look down an electron microscope, you can see the mitochondria quite clearly, and you can see the inner mitochondrial membrane, you can see the matrix. And the first few things that were discovered, if I remember correctly, Walter, the big discovery using the electron microscope, so people just put everything on the electron microscope because the resolution, as you said, was huge and still is the best way to look at a cell. Unfortunately, you have to kill the cell because you have to make you have to make the cell.
Replica.
You basically make a metallic replica of the cell, so it's dense. And there's artifacts, of course, but everybody now knows these artifacts. But the first thing that was like revolutionary was finding the ribosomes, right?
Yeah, not only.
All is not fully agreeing with me.
Not only the ribosomes. The ribosomes was not the big thing, but you could see DNA, you could see RNA.
Oh yeah, sure. Watson and Crick, they used what was the name again? But it wasn't their images. Watson and Crick did no experiments.
Yeah.
Franklin, Rosalind Franklin's X-ray images
confirmed, right?
No, they used that and Chargaff's rule and somebody else's experiments to put this hypothesis together. It was only a hypothesis. Yeah. And when Franklin was confronted, because Franklin made the crystallography, when Franklin was confronted by the hypothesis of Watson and Crick, she said, "That's nice. When will they ever prove it?" Because she was a real scientist. She needed it proved. Yeah. So, Franklin was a wonderful lady. And then me and Walter are now addicted to this part because and probably Max as well, because we grow epithelial cells. So there was a guy called the Romanian
Pallade,
yeah.
George Pallade.
Oh, it was George Pallade. And he found a few structures like tight junctions and adherence junctions and stuff like that. And they're almost impossible to resolve at the light microscopic level even now. And at the EM, they just shone up. And he, in one of his first papers, it was in the 80s, I believe, Walter, he described just from the EM images He called it a tight junction. He had Latin versions, adherence junction, and he had the desmosomes. And that's textbooks knowledge now, and they also still use his original images, which is fascinating. And he was right. He even ascribed function to these junctions, and it was a guess. But his guess was perfect. He was a smart guy.
The first perfect guess was perhaps the observation of Köliker in 1860, where he was observing under his paraffin embedded tissue, which was embedded in paraffin, hardened, infiltrated with molten paraffin, and then wait until it's hard, and you can cut it into very thin wax plates. And these wax plates could then be examined easily with a microscope because it's not very thick, it's fairly thin, light can easily penetrate, you can stain it, so you can modify the amplitudes of the light going through, and he saw a tiny basophilic little pieces within the cell. And interestingly,
what was that one light? That was with a light microscope.
Let me finalize. He was wondering what this is, and he made an interesting note on one of his sessions that tissue with presumably high metabolic activity had more of these tiny spots. And he allocated, or he denoted them as the micro energy plants of the cell. And that was mitochondrial. That was in 1864.
Yeah, but that's divergent to what we're talking about, because we're talking about the EM right now. But yeah, okay.
No, that was light microscope. At the EM, what at the EM was an exorbitantly important contribution. In order to examine tissues with EM, you have to denature the materials before, because you have to get rid of the Brownian motion.
Yeah.
First of all, and second, you have to get an image, and the image in the electron microscope is only made by the electrons which pass through the thin slice you have been making, and the thinner the slice is, the easier electrons penetrate, but the less they got straight, the higher their speed, the shorter their wavelength, the better the resolution would be, but the lower is the interaction between electron and object.
Yeah.
So you have to find the optimum conditions. And what at that time, everybody was wondering how the barrier is working and functioning, which covers every cell and certain subcellular structure. Now every cell. So it was unbelievable. Langmuir, the Netherlands chemist, he found out that the cell membrane must be very, very hydrophobic, not very lipophilic and hydrophobic, and but then they found out that there is also protein contained in these membranes, in this barrier, and a barrier that was easily understood how a barrier formed. Everybody knows the drop of the oil on the soup.
Well, Walter, I'm trying to drag the conversation somewhere else, but to tie this up, so we both met Weibull, and Weibull also was famous for his EM. In fact, Weibull and Pfaller named a organelle that's in endothelial cells the Weibull Pallade bodies. Yeah. And they discovered this simply by EM because it is a very unique structure. So once you see a Weibull Pallade body, every time you see one again, you immediately identify it. And so the Weibull Pallade bodies are in endothelial cells. They produce a compound or protein called von Willebrand factor, yeah. And it just looks it's very well structured. And we met Walter. We met Weibull. He was at one of the Pulmonet conferences. Remember? I think he's died since the Pulmonet, but he was a great scientist. He was well in his 80s when we met him. And he was still very passionate, very eager.
I met him in the same hotel the first time myself, 40 years ago. 40
years before.
Before, yeah. Before.
That was an advertisement to the Grauen Bar in
Grauen Bar, yeah.
On Universitätsstraße.
But let's make the story short.
Yeah.
The membrane, which people agree must be around the cell and keeps everything in, must be very lipophilic because there is lots of fat in, and it forms monolayers on that. They found out that monomolecular layers on top of a water phase.
Yeah.
But nobody could easily understand how the interior of the cell is also a water phase.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. And there comes the electron microscope into play.
Right.
When fixing cells, this barrier was, of course, also denatured. And we use heavy metals to enhance the interaction between electrons and object atoms. And there is a heavy metal which has been used already in light microscopy by the famous Camilo Golgi and Ramon Cajal from Spain, that it's osmic acid. And then thereafter, you could section the material and even enhance these positions in the cell where osmium deposed or was located. You could do this with lead, zinc, and other heavy metals.
But just for people who are not familiar, what you do is you take your sample, you make the slice, and then you sputter a metal on top of it.
No, not sputter.
No, that's scanning electron.
No.
Sorry, Walter, you go ahead.
You make this in the tissue blocks during preparation, and then you embed it you impregnate it with this heavy metals.
Right, that's what I meant.
Impregnated, then you infiltrate it with a monomeric monomer of a resin, and then you polymerize the resin, and it's a hard block containing the tissue. And this hard block is then cut by pieces of glass or diamond into very thin slices and can be exposed in vacuum on a support grid to the electron beam, and an image can be generated.
I suppose for somebody that can't vision this, it's a little bit like an MRI. I mean, just if you've ever seen MRI images that go across, so it's a bit like that. So you have a slice of a part of what the MRI sees, and then you see this, but it's only one slice of a tissue. And as scientists, we're very used to imagining what's on top of the slice and below the slice. But I guess if you're not doing this all the time, it's a bit confusing. So it's just simply a slice through a tissue that's prepared in a way that EM can see it.
That's exactly the art of morphology.
Right.
To make from a two-dimensional probe out a three-dimensional information.
I'm not going to bore people.
That is what has kept busy not millions, but people of anatomists over the years. They did nothing else than confabulate how an organ looks from simple sections.
But you did that in your habilitation thesis as well. What's it called? Is it stereology or seriology, isn't it?
Stereology.
Stereology.
Yeah. That's something else.
Yeah, but I don't want you to explain it because that gets too boring very quickly. So stereology is basically confabulating this and then calculating and making mathematical.
No, that has nothing to do with that. That's completely independent.
It's counting.
No,
it's counting, right?
So you have the sections, and from the sections you can conclude to the function, and right. that's the merits of the good anatomists and physiologists.
But just so I don't look like an idiot, you could calculate from slices mitochondrial volume, so you did confabulate.
That's a special approach to get more information out of the two-dimensional probes. You can get under certain keeping certain border conditions, you can get three-dimensional information, statistically three-dimensional information from two-dimensional probes.
Yeah, but it's a confabulation a bit. But anyway, so was your first technique that you were using the EM microscope?
Yeah, I studied several objects and had mostly to do with mitochondria.
Because when I arrived in 1999, you were already a well-advanced researcher, a senior researcher, a well-renowned researcher. And I remember two things that you had. So you had so that's a transmission electron microscope. You had a scanning electron microscope, which, I mean, that's really big things to have in the lab. And then you also had the isolated perfused kidney. So which were you using first? Or are you using them both together?
First was the electron microscope. And I used.
And what was your biggest outcome? I'm trying to put you on the spot now, but what was your biggest finding with the electron? Or what was your most satisfying use of the electron microscope?
Yeah, what I tried and what I did, in fact, in the end, I tried to find the link or a link between the structural appearance of renal epithelial cells and their constituents, their interior, to the function of this respective segment of a renal tubule or a renal cell, and using this stereology, the three-dimensional analysis of the tissue array, gave me a tool to compare the barriers I'm looking at, and I have been quantifying, to the transport rates, for example, and surfaces which are resembled or no, and surfaces or membranes which are made up of proteins, mainly enzyme molecules, enzyme proteins, to the materials or the amount of substrate utilized, or to the amount of product generated.
Right, and a lot of this was mitochondrial based, right? Because
so I could show that the number of respiratory chain complexes allocated or located at the mitochondrial inner membrane of the whole nephron, in the whole kidney, could just from knowing the turnover number of the cytochrome C, which is forming one ATP, and the other enzymes, which are forming succinic dehydrogenase, another ATP, and the NADH dehydrogenase forming the third one. Knowing the measure of what the kidney produced, so I could recalculate solely by morphologic data that and end up with a certain amount of ATP, which a rat kidney with so and so many gram can form within this and that time. And if you compare this to the data obtained with an isolated perfused kidney, where you do this on a metabolic basis, I ended up with almost the identical figure.
And Walter knows, but the audience don't know, we're still doing similar experiments today. We've abandoned the EM because now we can measure oxygen consumption on the cellular level. And that's and we have the pharmaceutical tools to block little parts of the electron transport.
Yeah, I would have loved to have had that and not to isolate mitochondria.
Yeah,
tedious, time-consuming, and
laborious. So we're coming to a point. We do a point of this podcast, not just to make Walter explain very complicated things
without drawing.
Yeah, without drawing. Walter really can explain this very well if he's got a pen and paper. But so Walter, when was your first idea to use cultured cells for such investigations, and why?
Of course, all the things we were just talking about were first applied on normal animal model. On a normal animal model, it was rat kidney, and of course, coming from the medical side, I know that the kidney is a very vulnerable organ, can be easily damaged, and nobody exactly knew at that time what is affected in case which types of damage can corrupt which function of the kidney. So, and that was not an easy undertaking, and that kept me busy for quite a few years. But in the end, it convinced me that the model I'm dealing with is far too complex and not easily overviewable at any time at any time point of the experiment. So I wanted to, and it was almost impossible to really discriminate between cause and result of cause of the damage and why this and not other damage is resulting. So it was fairly complicated. So I thought the easiest would be to put out the single cell, which is cell type, which is affected, and study it on that. So cut off all the higher order regulation systems and go down to the basic building block.
And luckily, at the time, Eli Lilly had developed almost accidentally a very good proximal tubular model and a pretty good, what they called it distal, but Walter found out later it was collecting duct. That's the MDCK cells. And they had commercialized them. They were using them for viral replication because epithelial has a pretty good viral replication. And Eli Lilly at the time were in the vaccine business. And it was, first they used to infect animals with it, but that was terribly complicated. So they found out if they could grow these cells, and by accident they were growing kidney cells from pigs and dogs, and just simply serendipity happened that these cells became immortal themselves. So they didn't know how to make them immortal, and they became immortal. And these serendipitous immortal cells tended to have pretty good phenotypes. So even still, MDSK cells are still bedrock of lots of studies, and the LSPK1 cells, they've lost a bit of attraction, but they're pretty decent cells. And Walter got his hands on the MDSK cells and the LSPK1 cells. As far as I know, Walter, he definitely didn't pay for them, right?
No.
And I think the first ever what? Yeah, well, oh yeah. Well, that's not. But I think, as far as I know, Walter was at least one of the first people. Let's say one of the first to do toxicological experiments in cell culture. Right.
That's right. So I expose these cells to various kind of toxins, starting with heavy metals, going to whatsoever. I studied, of course, also those models which I have been studying on the animal model. In the animal model, I repeated on the cell culture systems.
And now in the intervening years, things got, I have to say that Walter is always challenging things. So he wasn't that happy with the LSPK1 cells and the MDCK cells. So Walter was inventing ways to increase the oxygenation, stuff like that. Walter even had a company for a while that had, it wasn't the first time it was tried or commercialized, but it was to pass, to make the systems, because when you grow cells, normally you grow them static. That means there's no circulation. So there was a pretty influential guy, Will Minute, who started a commercial business that would basically pump medium over the cells. But we found, and I'm sorry, Will, if you're listening, we found it was kind of in the wrong direction. So Walter started first it was an EU grant that we just changed the orientation of it and had an apical and basolateral fold for epithelial cells. So this was Walter's idea. And I worked on this, and then Walter eventually commercialized it, but it wasn't a commercial success. It was kind of cumbersome, I have to say, because I worked with a lot. But it was a great idea. And now we hear only about microfluidic systems because clever people like Uwe Max, for example, listened to Walter's lectures and said, Walter said we have a problem. For lots of things, they're fine, but for more sophisticated investigations, these static cultures do not really represent as much as they should do in the body. And if we could have a proper microfluidic situation, they might do it better. And Uwe Max, to my mind, is the leading company in Europe. There's other companies. It's Tissues, right? That's Tissues, yeah. And there's other companies that have learned from Uwe and followed them, and there's American companies as well. And so now there's a market for this, and there's a Dutch company called Memetis as well. So this whole thing is now commercially viable. Unfortunately, when Walter started, it wasn't. And organoids and all this kind of thing. So to make these cells in culture more like they are in vivo, in vivo means in the body. I mean, we don't need them to be exactly like in the body, but we need them to be a bit more behaving like in the body, because when you grow cells on plastic, it's abnormal. So anyway, and now we have this beautiful idea that we can actually have human cells. We can get them from biopsies. We can get them from organs that are not transplantable. And now we can make stem cells from any single cell. And currently in our lab, but many other labs are doing it, you can take just urine, so piss basically, and there's living cells in pee for a while at least. And we can convert them to what's called pluripotent stem cells. And now we're beginning to grow cells that have pretty much the same characteristics as those cell lines that Walter began with 30 years ago. And we hope that if we grow them in more sophisticated ways, that we even have more. And from one individual, we can grow the blood, assimilate the blood-brain barrier. We can grow similes of brains. I'm not saying me, I'm saying different groups can do this. We can grow pretty good kidney-like cells. We can grow pretty much liver-like cells. So now this thing that somebody else would have done it anyway if Walter didn't do it, but what Walter began with is now a real science. So this in vitro toxicology is a real science, and it has now the probability or the possibility to completely redefine how we develop drugs and how we, and maybe we won't need animals for toxicological experiments at all anymore, because these in vitro systems will be so precise and so representative of a single individual or even a population that we can develop drugs quicker, faster, and to better cohorts, so we can identify the people who have a problem and go for that. And that's where it comes to a project me and Walter were doing. And we had the concept of this project, I think about 6 years ago, Walter, or even before. I was definitely in Innsbruck, so it was a few years. So I'm 5 years now in Amsterdam, and I'm pretty sure we had it 3 or 4 years before I left Innsbruck.
7 years ago.
Yeah. So the idea was to write a book about these things, but that most people could understand. I mean, and we're trying to explain it in a way that you need to know a little, but you didn't need to know a lot. So at least we could explain biology to our fellow chemists, and if you can explain to our fellow chemists, then of course maybe a person who's not a scientist at all could get it. Just close it out. So we started with the concept that isn't it a bit strange that we can grow cells outside the body? I mean, there is Netflix videos from Henrietta Lacks, and these were the first cells, the first human cells that were grown in culture. It was a cervical cancer from Mrs. Lacks, and lots of things went kind of wrong with that. One is there was no ethical principles at the time, so there was no informed consent for taking tissue outside the body, but there was no legal premise for that.
There was another challenge in that context.
Oh yeah, well, I was going to come to that. So those cells polluted all the other cell banks because
not that. That's another. But Innsbruck and cell culture, there is a very deep connection, because an anatomist called Wilhelm Roux, he was the first man who could, for longer than a few days, keep beating chicken heart muscle cells alive in a saline solution.
I have no idea what that got to do with Henrietta Lacks, but it's an important point.
That's the connection.
Not human.
Oh yeah, human.
Outside the body.
Oh no, I meant sorry. I was only human. I was only talking about human. So HeLa was the first human cells.
Yeah.
No, it was done. Oh yeah. So Roux did it first. I think there was even maybe a few people before him, but Hugh became famous. Who signed out? I don't know. Sorry, my Zoom is complaining, but we're still going, right? Yeah, we're still going. I mean, Innsbruck had so many great biological. Paracelsus was working there for some time. There was William Roux, and there was so many. Innsbruck at some stage had some of the best scientists there. Not least Walter Pfaller and Polly Beetle and Thomas Haller and myself and Florian Lang and all these guys. Where were we? Okay, so there is issues and there's ethical issues and stuff, but we wanted to write a book that was fair and slightly controversial, and we thought the concept of Frankenstein would be a good way to attract the mind, right? Because, I don't want to develop this too much right now, but so we wanted to base it a bit around Frankenstein, because it is a bit artificial. Like, you can be dead, like Henrietta was, and her cells are produced in tonnages all over the world. So her consciousness is no longer there, but she's not really dead. She's immortal, and so that's a possible. Well, it's not a possibility; it's a fact. Right? So we have all these cell lines from people now, so there's thousands of human cell lines around, and so those people, even though they're no longer physically present as a human, their cells are living in labs and experiments are being conducted on them. So if you think about it in those terms, it can be it can sound a little bit creepy, because your genes are still living, and it's usually, in these cases, usually the cancer cells, the thing that killed you, that people are investigating. So the book, we initially called it In Frankenstein's Footsteps, but Walter wasn't happy with that, and he was right. We have many ideas for the name, and then in the end we came to a consensus, and we called it Frankenstein's Followers, because we want to follow the idea that Frankenstein was it was a conceptual experiment in Mary Shelley's brain, but it was an amazing concept that you could make something that should be dead alive.
Clarify, because for quite some time it was confusing for myself as well. Frankenstein, you refer to Frankenstein monster.
No, Frankenstein did the experiment. Frankenstein's monster was the experiment. So Frankenstein was the scientist, and Frankenstein's monster. So we're not stupid people, me and Walter. So it was Frankenstein's followers, because it was his experiment. Yeah. So Frankenstein's monster was the experimental output of
outcome. It was the outcome.
Yeah, but anyway, this is all conceptual because Mary Shelley thought this up. So we'll start from there. Now we're going to talk about Frankenstein's followers. Now I had a German interview, Tyrolean interview, let's say, with Hardy S. and Thomas Haller on FIRAD, and that's somewhere up on the social media. And they asked, it was very interesting. Thomas Haller's podcast is in English. Thomas buys a microscope and looks inside. I think in German it's Thomas Haller kauft ein Mikroskop und schaut hinein. And let's start with this. So Max should be kind of the interviewer. I have a few questions, but maybe Max, you can just do it ad lib. Here you go. Here's some of my questions.
Well, here is my first question, if I can read the notes that I was just given a minute ago. Where are we?
Well, it's around here. So we're publishing toxicology in vitro. Like, what's the vision? What's the name? What's the message? All that kind of stuff.
Okay. So you
can also use your brain, Max.
Yeah, I can try that. Yeah. So what's the starting points? What's behind the Frankenstein follower?
The book.
Yeah.
Well, I think. And Walter, please add to this. I think I've never seen a piece of text that explains in vitro, and not just toxicology. So we have an application of toxicology, but I've never seen it explained in one shot, right? So we wanted to try and explain the technical advances of growing cells outside the body, and the history of that, and the dangers that are incorporated with that. So I think that was the point, Walter.
Yeah.
So to have it in one body of text.
So combining the ethical challenge which are created by this evolution and listing the history of the evolution, is it the concept?
Yeah. So we planned. So we published one chapter. So we got a bit stressed about it. So we decided to publish it in chapters in toxicology in vitro, and the idea is to publish it as a book later. So we published the first chapter, which is the vision. So it explains the history of Mary Shelley, how she came up with the concept, and there's a little bit add-ons to that. But we want to. So Walter has a chapter about Alexander Volta. He might discuss. I'm going to write a chapter about cells, which is inspired by our podcast about cells. And then we wanted to write a chapter about the history, and then we have 2 or 3 other chapters that are conceived but not well developed, and then we wanted to write a conclusion chapter.
And when it comes to the ethical concern related to this successive advance, do you look it from the nowadays perspective, because ethics is something which obviously is evolving?
No,
we're actually from the time.
No, we're actually looking at the future perspectives. Walter, you wanted to say anything about what could go wrong?
Right. So we can use it for the good, and we can use it. We can let it go, and then perhaps it ends up in a very dangerous situation.
So Harry asked me. Or I think it was maybe Thomas Haller. He said, "What do you mean? So how could it go dangerous?"
No, it could go dangerous that DNA editing allows creation or allows making of individuals which otherwise would never exist.
Eugenics, right?
That's eugenics, yeah. And that's so. What Walter means is, because that doesn't sound like in vitro, but you do it in vitro. So you do it with the egg or the sperm.
Yeah.
So you manipulate the. This is also in vitro. So you can manipulate. You can do this quite easily. I think we discussed this before. So you can do this really quite easily with the CRISPR-Cas9 technique, and you can genetically edit. It's not allowed, by the way, but it has been done creepily in China once or twice, and they were exposed and kicked out. So okay, that's deliberate genetic engineering for eugenic, maybe fascist purposes. I mean, that's what Hitler was all about, eugenics, right? So that's creepy. We don't want to do that. But it could be subtle that you would like your child to have green eyes, you know.
Huh.
But I still think that shouldn't be possible. But that's my opinion in 2022. I mean, maybe that changes later, as long as it's regulated and you can choose. I don't like that concept, though.
No, but as far as I got it, you need to, from scientific people, to alert others of the possibilities of the evolution of these techniques, what they can offer as possibility.
Yeah, but that's kind of
possibly someone else than scientists can.
But that's
thinking about.
Yeah, but that's kind of what we want to do in the book as well, is alert to the dangers of doing this. Like another ethical problem is that we suppose now I'm only doing toxicology. I'm not involved. It's not that I'm not interested. It's just a different branch of science. The use of growing cells outside of your body and taking your own cells and growing them outside the body means that you can actually implant them back in again. So you can grow kidney cells, liver cells, and you will be able to grow a whole kidney soon, very soon, a whole liver very soon, and you can transplant that, and a heart, and you can transplant them back into you, which means you can live for much, much, much longer. And I'm talking much longer, like 50, 60 years longer than currently possible. I think the current limit is about 110, and very few people reach that. But let's say the average lifespan in Europe for men is about 85 or something like that. But you'll be able to really easily live until you're 120, 130. That has consequences for society, but that's a societal problem. But I discussed in the Freirad thing that what if politicians or dictators use that to make their surrounding people live longer than the masses, which is basically what happened in the past, where dictators used hunger and pestilence. Like Genghis Khan was famous for using pestilence to kill his enemies. He would throw dead bodies back in. So he basically make them live shorter than his enemies. So that's already used. So in the wrong hands, this stuff can be dangerous for transplant medicine. But let's not get into that right now. Just talk about the application of the in vitro systems. Can that be ethically? Can that be an ethical issue? Because you're growing cells outside the body. When does it become ethically? So when does growing cells in culture become worse than using an animal?
Yeah,
I think if you make a full multi-organ chip that can think and feel pain, then we've gone too far.
Yeah, right.
And I think first of all, it shouldn't be connected to a central nervous system, and I don't think we should ever go that far that we make the neurons be able to be conscious. We really should stop at that level, in my mind, because what are we doing? We're creating Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, we should under any circumstances prevent to create an outside, solely outside the body, growing individual with humanoid or human behavior.
So it shouldn't be conscious. It shouldn't have a consciousness.
Well, yeah, the problem is if we have everything under control to prevent that.
Yeah, we don't, because we're randomly just doing experiments. And I think the people in neurological field will be just really happy if they can think, so wow,
yeah,
cool.
Exactly. Because in the meantime, you would still find very nice application of that on the right side, because that's something you want to be able to use possibly.
But when does it come you're creating a sentient being and then torturing it?
That's the problem. But how do you really, are we strong enough that we can know which stage represents consciousness?
I don't know, it's not regulated yet. That's the issue.
Yeah, but biologically speaking, how do you characterize that? Do we know? Because I remember being young and trying to kind of steal time from my philosophy teacher. The idea was, okay, the longer he speaks, the fewer we have things to check on our textbook. And he started one sentence saying that animals have no conscience. So we just...
Oh yeah, but I also teach this. So in the when Russell and Birch made their master, what's it called, a systematic review. Yeah. It was well, it's a masterpiece of a systematic review. They also discussed that. So they said they always said you could use lower animals.
Yeah.
But that was in 1959. What does that mean, a lower animal? But they meant that it didn't have a well-developed central nervous system. Yeah. And you can discuss like fish, maybe they don't feel pain.
Yeah, but what's with the octopus?
Yeah, but octopus has a pretty well-developed brain core and the smart animals, they live for very short. I wouldn't be in favor of doing experiments on octopus or eating them.
I never would. I stopped eating them.
Yeah, I don't eat octopus. I don't even like them, to be honest.
I had a colleague.
It was an easy choice.
Yeah, it was easy.
No,
no sacrifice.
They can be very tasty. No, but I had a friend in Sardinia. He was always fed him in the morning, a octopus like this. He was always on my side, on the left side, and always looking at my eyes during swimming. Every day for 14 days. Maybe he committed suicide when I left.
Depression.
No, but, yeah, so far you mentioned that we can now interconnect tissues, and you said
it's not exactly true. So the aim is to interconnect the visceral organs. We can do it.
Yeah, you already said we can have a brain and we can have possibly an
heart. But they're not interconnected yet.
Yeah.
So what we do is even with the microfluidic systems, we're just connecting through a microfluidic system. They don't really connect with each other. Also, none of them yet so far. I mean, Uwe has made some proof of concepts where you can do them from the same individual using iPS cells to differentiate them, but the differentiation protocols are not that well advanced yet. So it's a matter of time only. We're getting better at that. But the real interconnection is going to take quite some time, but it will be possible to do it. I mean, you have to remember, all we're doing is recapitulating fetal development. And so it's simply a sperm meets an egg, and that happens every single time. Yeah. So we just have to learn how that works, and we can do it then for the individual tissues, and then we reconnect them back together, and it will be really possible that they really are interconnected and they really talk to each other, and it would be possible to have a chip like an in vitro chip that feels pain and suffers from the pain, and I think that's too far.
Yeah, but probably that's too far from your scientific point of view. From a layman perspective, mentioning that you have a beating heart and a firing neuron into your device probably is already a kind of a concern, because then it would take a lot of education to explain that they are kind of connected by fluids, but they are not physically connected by cells and sense of the pain. So there is a need for probably education around what we do, why we do, and what it's.
Well, 40 or 50 years ago, when the embryonic cells came up, there was war because they came, or some of them came from aborted fetuses. The fetus was aborted anyway, and they took the stem cells from that, and it's not like they deliberately aborted fetuses. This was the miscommunication that you had to do it over and over again. It was one was enough because they could just grow them. So the induced pluripotent stem cells are cleaner on that level because you can give your pea to somebody and they can grow them, and you don't consider your pea a precious thing. So.
But probably even by saying we would stop at fetal stage, for some people it would be already an issue. We just seeing a kind of crazy about in US.
Let's be careful. We're not growing fetuses.
No, but
so so basically you take these these induced pluripotent stem cells from an adult that has given full consent, and then using the Yamanaka grade factors. These are 4 factors. You just overexpress them using a virus. They become pluripotent stem cells, and then we site direct them to a tissue. So there's no fetus form. It's just we grow directly from those stem cells, a kidney or a liver or a brain. It doesn't go through the fetal reproduction. They cannot, because only totipotent stem cells can do that. So the pluripotent stem cells cannot form a fetus. Only totipotent cells can do that, and that's one step behind it. Right. Let's change. Max.
Yeah. So, but still, this advance in science also opens up possibilities which would be beneficial to society. So, who do you think should be responsible for regulating it?
No, but first and foremost, and this is where me and Walter are, we're mostly aligned anyway, but the first application is that we can replace, or the idea is to eventually replace animals completely from toxicological paradigms.
Yeah, because...
Well, Walter, maybe you say a few words on that, because Walter was very instrumental in societies and stuff like that to develop this idea that you can use cell culture instead of animals.
Yeah. That is still the major goal, which we should achieve. We should achieve a test strategy or a behavior which always should try to avoid animals.
And the lobby groups, and I think honestly, fair play to them. The animal rights lobby groups were very instrumental in pushing the 3-year policy and getting it enforced. And they actually pushed it so far that the cosmetic, I don't like the term, the cosmetic industry, the personal care industry was absolutely forced in 2013 not to use animals anymore. And then it was phased in, but eventually they're not allowed to use animals at all anymore.
No, cosmetics has managed anyway. No cosmetic product is tested anymore by animals, by using animals.
In Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
Yeah, but Europe spawned the Japanese, Chinese.
Because the problem is that America does not consider rats and mice as animals.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Well,
as experimental animals.
Oh yeah.
Well, we should check that legally before. So caveat that might not be true. But anyway, the Americans are also pretty good in developing mechanistic toxicology, and we collaborate with people in the NIH. And
I think one outcome of this undertaking should be that we contribute to the public that a better understanding for biology arises. Second, a better understanding of the long and tedious and also careful way to develop new drugs, and to understand the interaction between these fields: development, testing, pharmaceutical industry, but also industry as a whole, and also food industry. That is very important.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, there's many industries involved. So there's a chemical industry which produce chemicals for manufacturing, and those chemicals can get into the air. But if you're working in the factories, you can be exposed to them. Then there's a cosmetic industry where you actually apply these things to your inner body. So if you're talking like toothpaste or personal care products like tampons or whatever, they actually go inside you. Condoms, these kind of things are anything that go into your body, but also the skin. Most of these things are applied on the skin, and not like mostly the skin stops things going through, but some things go through. And then you have these gases, like these sprays you put underneath your arm and stuff like that, and you actually inhale these things. So they're very good at I mean, none of these things have been quite dangerous, except for, I have to be careful here, but I think Johnson & Johnson got sued for having issues with their talcum powder for baby products because they had chemical contaminations of the talcum powder that caused cancer in a certain amount of babies. So when it goes wrong, it's terrible, but it doesn't go wrong very often because of the regulations. But then, as Walter said correctly, the food we take is very heavily regulated, and they're also quite heavily contaminated. And in Europe, it's the European Federation of Food Safety Authority, that's the EFSA. And they are troubled by all of this thing, and they're trying to develop methods as well, and they're very heavily involved in developing
vitro test,
non-animal models, so computational and in vitro, and then ECHA is involved with chemical, and then we have EMA, so the European Medicines Agency, are involved in the pharmaceutical. So the European Union is pretty well regulated of every way we take in stuff through our mouths, what we breathe in, and what we put on our bodies. And all of them are fairly aligned with the fact that it would be easier and quicker to do this with cell culture and computational methods, which we call in silico. And now recently, or not even recently, but recently it has been beginning to work, that the computational people, so the people who are very good with computers and modeling, are working alongside the people who are growing cells. They make our experiments better, and we make their models better. And that's kind of cool. So the acceleration is huge, but there's also huge technological accelerations, like being able to measure every single mRNA, which is the message to make a protein, be able to measure a big chunk of the proteins, and be able to measure all of the metabolome products. These are the very small molecules. So we can do all of these things now quite well and fast. Well, we should come to an end soon because we're well over an hour. So what do you want to sum up? So we discussed a lot about Walter's beginning of his career, where he was.
I'm still curious about it, Walter, because at the time I started, in vitro was already something. I mean, it was not as
but you're a very young man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
what year were you born, Max?
I was born in 79.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're like 25?
Yeah, that's it. 27. You're not that good at math. 27.
That's why I do in vitro, not in silico.
Yeah. But in vitro was already an established thing somehow. It was not as easy, but it was already pretty established because I started working in a lab with cells shortly before 2000. But when you started, how was it welcome to present data?
There was nothing on the market in the field of kidney, which was in vitro. Nothing.
But how difficult was it to publish them all then?
Yeah.
Oh, that was not that difficult because we had a certain name regarding morphology and the kidney, and that was a good help to enter the field again with an other from another viewpoint.
And as far as I remember, your morphological experiments, for example, with the MVSK cells, you clarified that they were not distal; they were collective, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it was like they were self-critical about the tools they used.
Yeah.
So also Walter knew quite early that the LSCPK1 cells grown on plastic, they were not as oxidative as what he saw they didn't have enough mitochondria as he saw in vivo. That's why Walter was eager to give them more oxygen and make the EpiFlow system and do microfluidic devices and give them more oxygen.
Oh.
And Gerhard Straunthaler also was developing things to shake them. So that's kind of what the mimesis system does. It shakes the cells gently to give them more oxygen.
Yeah, he brought in the classical applications he knew from botany and microbiology.
Yeah, so these tricks to improve oxygenation, like Gerhard was playing with the medium volumes, and then so I learned because I went to that lab, and Gerhard was telling me that the surface area and the distance to the cells was really important. I remember Martin Leonard actually showed me an experiment where he had A549 cells, so these are lung cancer cells, and he had a micromanipulator that was an oxygen probe, and the closer he went to the cells, the less oxygen there were. Because, if you're a physiologist, you know that oxygen diffuses really slowly through water, and our mediums are water-based, and that's why hemoglobin has evolved, I think, 7 or 8 times independently, and there was other copper-based oxygen carriers, like in old ancient crabs that still exist, like the horseshoe crab. They have blue blood. But any animal that has red blood is mostly hemoglobin, and that evolved like independently at least 7 times.
Yeah, over vanadium.
Yeah, and it's simply because if you're a larger size and you've got skin which is impenetrable to oxygen, you need a system to develop, and we grow our cells without any of these oxygen carriers. So lowering the medium volume increases the oxygen to the cells. And then people tell me all the time, even last week, somebody said, oh no, that's silly because 21% oxygen in the air. And I said, yeah, but it doesn't get to the cells. Yeah. Because it's like a kilometer of water that doesn't like oxygen. Water doesn't really like oxygen, so it's difficult to get through. So and that's the beauty of the microfluidics, because it circulates and it has an oxygen saturation area that's sometimes simply the plastic around it. So as it circulates, it gets reoxygenated, and that's better. And the mitochondria need the oxygen, otherwise they can't respond. Okay, that was one thing. We settled that point. So that was. What else did we discuss? Because we're on the summary points now.
Can you mail me the link?
Yeah, we haven't finished yet, Walter. So we're still recording the podcast. We're just trying to sum up now.
Yeah.
So, what else did we discuss?
I don't know. We covered part of it, because my expectation is that there will be upcoming chapter of Frankenstein follower. So if my memory is correct, people can listen to it on the podcast, right?
Yeah, well,
the editorial.
For the first one, I read it out, but I'm not sure I'm going to keep doing this because they can be quite so long. Maybe I will. Let's see. The first chapter, I just simply read it out, and it's on one of our podcasts. They're all published, the idea is to publish them all in Toxicology in Vitro, and if you don't have access to Elsevier, I also publish a stripped out version on my webpage. The next chapter will be on cells, and me and Walter are busy writing that now, and it was heavily inspired by Max's and my conversation, which was episode 2, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And Walter is writing one which is going to be very interesting about the electricity, so the energy of cells, and the electrical currents that are generated. And actually that was important for Shelley's imagination. Yeah. Walter, maybe you discuss this. So Shelley, discuss a little bit about Shelley's interest in electricity?
That was in the field of the natural sciences, interested upper class people at that time. That was the 1850s, 50s, and later. They were very, very attracted by the experiments, which also were discussed in the public, from Benjamin Franklin, with the electricity which comes out from the lightnings, and which can trigger muscle twitches, etc. Then of Luigi Galvani and his nephew Salvini, who Galvani could show that electrical current going through biologic material can trigger reactions. So that's the frog leg twitches. And Alessandro Volta invented the battery stack and reached voltages up to 100 volts. And that's enough to also bring human muscles to twitch. So Salvini, the nephew of Galvani, he experimented with death, or with executed, with the dead bodies of executed persons, and he also investigated how long it takes until the corneal reflex is gone.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying this today that it's in a lecture today that it's very easy to spot a dead animal, but if the dead animal is freshly dead or a dead person is freshly dead, their cells are all still alive.
Yeah.
And depending on how long they've been dead, you can basically make their arm move or whatever if you stimulate in the right place, because those neurons are still alive and intact. And if you go on to the whole philosophy of what a cell is or what life is, it's basically, if you define it like on its simplest basis, it's the ability to transfer one type of energy to another type of energy, and often it's current based. So having a potential of one ion to another ion, that's how batteries work, and that's a definition of life, or it's a definition of a living thing, that it has a potential energy.
Yeah,
and that's why the confusion is with viruses, because they have no energy. But the thing is, viruses can affect the cell and change the energy properties of that cell to their own advantage. So maybe a virus is only alive while it's in its infectious stage, and it's in a dormant stage while it's outside of the cell. So my opinion is that viruses are kind of a life form, and they're absolutely a life form while they're in their infection stage.
Since the interconnections were not very well understood at that time, of course, it was a very interesting approach, which might offer the possibility to resurrect a person, to regain life again.
They knew nothing about cellular life then. So there was the Koch, who was basically, I think the Charité was sort of organized around Koch and his colleagues. Koch was one of the first to discover that there was these pathogenic things, so germ therapy, and we didn't connect that with humans. It was just like, oh, they're pathogens, but what about us? So we didn't know there were a bunch of cells, and so they just thought if you could apply electricity, maybe you can make somebody alive again. Maybe they just ran out of energy, and that was the inspiration for the Frankenstein thing. Anyway, you can read our chapter. It's online. We'll put a link to it in the bottom. It's well written. Walter wrote most of it. I'll put a link to me reading it out. And yeah, so thanks for listening. Thanks, Walter, for entertaining us, and thanks for taking our questions. Thanks, Max, for being here for the PET course. Always a pleasure. And we'll put in the regular sound bites. So thanks, Walter. Well, don't go away. We're just going to stop the recording now.
Have a good week and successful seminar or course.
Thanks, Walter. But we're just going to stop the recording, so stay on.
Il parle de microscope. C'est de meilleurs potes. Il parle de microscope. C'est de meilleurs potes. Il parle de microscope. Ça parle de bactéries parce que c'est des grands amis. En tout cas, pour résumer, ce qu'il faut s'écrire dans cette lettre. La science, nous on fait de la science.